Right, good morning everybody and welcome to our Places and Resources Overview Committee meeting for the 12th of September. Just like to remind you of the use of the microphones. The most important thing I think is to recognise that only one microphone can work at one time. So you need to press the button and when the light comes up red, it works. You should address your remarks to the microphone and please not to the room in general, as we found in the past that particularly people trying to listen in from outside can't really hear what's going on here very well unless you talk into the microphone directly. So we'll please do that. Also, could all officers and members, when they make any remarks, introduce who they are each time so that it's very clear who are making the remarks. Okay. We'll make a start then. Our first item, apologies.
Chairman, apologies from Councillor Parks.
Any others? No, in which case we'll note that absence. Item 2, the minutes of our meeting held on the 11th of July, over 5 pages. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about the minutes? No, in which case I will shortly sign them as a true and accurate record of the meeting. Then we're moving on to item 3, any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you very much. Item 4, Chair's update. I don't have anything to update you with today. So moving on to public participation. We had a question in from Carol Chedji, who's a member of the public. Have we been able to make through communications?
I'm here.
Well, if you'd like to go ahead and read out your question, please.
Thank you. I'm a trustee and vice chair of the Allendale Community Centre, a registered charity in Wimborne, Dorset. We have a lease of the Allendale Centre from Dorset Council from 2nd April 2020 to 1st April 2035. Essential repairs, including a leaking roof, which are due to be carried out by Dorset Council under the lease and agreements, have been planned since 2020. There is a report of 139 pages by Crick Maystark Architects of December 2022, commissioned by DC, setting out the work to be done, plus many other subsequent reports and plans and surveys. 2 planned dates for the work to be done in 2023 and 2024 have been cancelled by DC. In August, an officer told us the work had been pulled as the centre is part of a regeneration and development zone. We have read the report and plan at item 7 on the agenda. This refers to a 3-year plan. Our question is, has the work been pulled because of this document? And whether or not this is the case, will DC immediately carry out the vital and necessary work planned 4 years ago so that it complies with the lease and agreements made? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have an answer from Jessica. Yes.
I'm Jessica Maskery. I'm Interim Head of Service for Assets and Development. And I have a written response here to read out. The deferral of the works isn't related to the Strategic Asset Management Plan being discussed under item 7. At this stage, the works have been temporarily deferred to ensure that the proposed programme of significant roof repairs on the Allendale Centre represents value for money, and the following points should be noted. 1, a recent survey report dated in 2024 identified additional repairs externally on the centre. We want to ensure that a new roof represents the best option given the increasing costs of these repairs. The Council has a limited capital investment allocation in 24-25, and the priority is to ensure all facilities are safe, legal and compliant ahead of major building improvements. These are being prioritised on a condition basis. And then 3, a strategic review of Dorset Council-owned accommodation in Wimborne is underway in order to support the emerging town strategy. This review, supported by Councillor Bartlett, will include the former Magistrates Court, the former Pippin's site, the Movie Makers Hut and the St John's Ambulance site, and it's important to reflect the Allendale Centre as part of that review. A decision will be made in the near future with regard to the repairs and before the end of this year, and we'll provide an update as soon as we can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive response. I hope you'll go away and make sure that things happen as we've said. Thank you very much. Moving then on to item 6, questions from councillors. I don't believe we have any. Okay. And moving on to item 7, Strategic Asset Management Plan 2024 to 2030. Jessica, are you starting off, or is Councillor Biggs introducing the item?
I believe it's me. So again, I'm Jessica Maskery. I am Interim Head of Asset Strategy and Development at Dorset Council. So this draft Strategic Asset Management Plan covers the period from 2024 to 2030 and replaces the previous Property Strategy and Asset Management Plan, which ran from 2020 to 2024. This new Strategic Asset Management Plan, or SAMP, proposes a new way of working whereby the council commits to the provision of a council property estate that works for everyone, an estate that supports the priorities and services of the council in a more cohesive way than previously and delivers not only better services, but the key interests of the public, value for money, fairer, sustainable local economies, and enhanced placemaking. That new way of working outlined in the SAMP very clearly positions property and the assets and regeneration team as a support to the organisation to enable the delivery of council priorities rather than as a frontline discipline in its own right. It represents a step change from the traditional property management approach, seeking opportunistic savings and one-off sales, moves us to a placemaking approach, considering property as a platform for growth and change. It sits beneath the Dorset Council plan, supporting the delivery of the priorities within that, and aligns with not only the local plan, but also the various corporate and service strategies and plans. Beneath the Strategic Asset Management Plan will be a suite of contributory strategies and policies. The strategy sets out the priorities for use of the council's assets and property derived from the council's priorities and commits the council to managing these assets strategically, to providing corporate certainty and governance, and also alignment with financial planning, and of course supporting the delivery of council services. These priorities for use of council assets are key to ensuring the best use of the property estate, because without that prioritisation, there is a risk that council assets are spread too thinly, the capital programme becomes oversubscribed, and that asset decision-making may become stymied. The strategy outlines the principles, criteria and process for decision-making regarding future use of assets. It describes regular reviews of assets and opportunities arriving. These asset reviews comprise detailed consideration of options and comprehensive appraisal. And with this process, resulting from this process is a planned pipeline of key projects and a phased financial commitment, which results in a return that can be achieved. The document has had extensive internal consultation and received significant support and buy-in. However, it's important to note that any asset strategy can only work if it's corporately supported and recognised by all parties as the governing process for asset decision-making and implementation. A couple of final notes. The document is currently being graphically designed, so the version that you've seen today will not be the final version. And the KPIs associated with the Strategic Asset Management Plan are currently in development, as we're keen to align them with the KPIs associated with the newly emerging council plan.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Biggs.
Thank you very much, Jessica Maskery, for that introduction. I guess, from my point, sorry, I'm Richard Biggs, the Cabinet Member for Property Assets and Economic Growth, so this comes within my area. It can, on first glance, seem like a very dry document, not exactly exciting bedtime reading, but the delivery of services for this council very much depend on people and the buildings and property that we use to deliver those services. So it is really key that we get this right. I believe that the way forward, it is good practice, regular procedures which are commonplace elsewhere. And I think, obviously, this council is inherited property. It's taken cultures from district councils, county councils, and it's now trying to, at last, put into a strategic way of doing things so there's a consistent approach. And has been pointed out, the alignment of the Dorset Council Plan, which is yet to be redone, is quite key to this. So that's why you haven't got your KPIs. I would also say there's some interesting statistics on there, particularly for newer members, looking at the asset database. And perhaps people will be surprised to see that we've actually got as many hotels and guest houses as we do education facilities. And you can see that on a number of, it's surprising what we do own. And I'm still getting to terms with everything. And I've been involved, obviously, with Dorset County Council for many years, over 20 years prior to that. I think also there's some potential for some conflicting interests. And I think there's, I was looking on page 19, commercial approach to driving greater income yields to support service delivery. We're all in favour of that, aren't we, delivering that commercial approach. However, next to that is driving economic growth and opportunity. And what we don't need to do is to, if we're thinking in particular, let's say hotels and guest houses, not to charge leaseholders, exorbitant rents, etc., if that means putting people out of business. And it's the same thing, that I'll see in the transport area with car parks. There's a tension there, and providing some logical approach, but a consistent approach. So trying to get good commercial value, but also not driving down economic growth. And I think that's something that we've got to be really careful to do when delivering it. It has been said that the KPIs will be determined once that Dorset plan is in place. And I think that's the key to measuring it. So you can come back to scrutiny in a year's time or whenever and say, how's it been working? Yes or no, in certain areas. Some things work very well, other things are a little disjointed, and it's a somewhat work in progress. So I really think this is a really good document, but I'd be interested to hear your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do first is just to remind members of the structure for how we deal with this type of issue. First thing to do is to invite people who are not members of the committee to have any comments or questions that they have, and then we'll go on to debate amongst committee members. So is there anybody who's not a member of the committee who wants to ask any questions? Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. For the avoidance of any doubt, and I'm not entirely sure whether it was slightly clumsy wording or a deliberate attempt to have a political swipe at the previous administration, but I can assure you as a member of the previous council administration that it has always been our perspective that the assets of the council would be used for the benefit across the communities. It was never our intention that it should be anything other than for use across Dorset for the benefit of all our communities. And I do hope that the new administration would want to follow our example in the way it goes forward with the strategic asset management plan.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman. And as you all know and appreciate, as my Vice Chairman on the previous Scrutiny Committee and the Chairman of the Scrutiny Committee, we regularly had the asset strategy plan coming before us. I think we dealt with about 5 different officers during the course of that period. There was there was a lot of our people were within place services at that time. And just to give an assurance to Councillor Parry that there was no slight intended. Fully appreciate the previous administration view that the asset management and the assets should deliver the best outcomes for the population of Dorset and for the council authority itself. I do note within the report how much it's actually costing to maintain the estate and what income we benefit from that. And there's quite a difference between the two. So just to give Councillor Parry an assurance that there was no slight intended, and we do understand the previous view of the administration, and ours we continue in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Bryan, representing St Leonard's and St Ives. And the reason for my question is because we have a very high level of more elderly population over in my ward. I'm looking at the Dorset priorities. If I was reading this as a layman, I'd be looking to see where adult services fits into this. And are we going to be looking after the adult population? I think the report should show what is children's services and what is adult services, so it actually helps the general public understand what we're trying to achieve here. I'm sure it was not meant to exclude the titles, but I do think the report leaves it a bit vague. I mean, if I go to bullet point 4, supporting delivery of special educational needs, yep, so that's children. Whoops, my computer's decided to close down on me. And then it goes early intervention provision, well, that's children, and care and support services through provision of suitable assets. Now, I'm assuming that would be the adult side of it, but because it's all included in the same bullet point, I don't think it's particularly clear. I've made it very clear throughout my time as with the Dorset County Council as it was, and Dorset Council for the last 5.5 years, that provision of our assets is important for both children and adult services. So I just think perhaps one of the officers can give some clarity as to why it's a bit mixed up. Thank you, Chairman.
Jessica, do you want to do that? Oh, okay. Julian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And for the benefit of the recording, my name is Julian Wayne. I'm a Strategic Place Advisor to the Council. I've worked with Assets and Regeneration for about 18 months now. I think two things to say just in response to Councillor Bryan. I mean, I think the first thing is one of the beauties of this overview process is for us to refine our words and strengthen what needs to be said. And so thank you, first of all, for his comments. And we will certainly take that away and refine the wording. I would add one other thing, though, for yourselves and also for you to consider whether you want to recommend anything to Cabinet. And I'm not particularly speaking about Dorset here, but I'm talking about local government generally. There is a risk that everything is a priority. And I think in an era when resources are limited and where you've already got to juggle multiple priorities and multiple aims and objectives, I think we would encourage you to prioritise, because actually, with limited resources and limited assets, you can't actually do everything. So I think it is important that you do come to a decision about what you actually really do prioritise. But clearly, there was no intention that those things would not be considered. And you will note in the body of the strategy that each and every department has been considered and has indicated their priorities within it. So hopefully it is covered, but we can certainly refine the words. But I do leave you with the thought that you can't actually do everything.
Yes, Councillor Biggs.
Just to echo that, the page is page 25, where adults and housing is quite clearly laid out as in what that means in terms of property maintenance and asset management. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Somper, Beacon Ward. Obviously, we are aware that there is a farming panel, which I understand is going to have a change of focus and governance. Are there any plans to introduce further panels for any of the other categories? You mentioned the fact that we have a large number of hotels.
Obviously, we are aware that there is a farming panel.
Oh, there's an echo. Sorry, I think that's it. So are there any plans to introduce further panels for any of those other categories that we have, particularly where there are large numbers of buildings, properties?
Can anyone answer that question? Councillor Biggs?
I'm not aware at the moment. Obviously, there's a long-standing relationship with the Tharms. I have reached out recently to Wenf hoteliers who are experiencing problems. If there's a feel that would be beneficial, that's something we might consider in order to get perhaps members more engaged, perhaps local members in Weymouth, because I think that's an area that's perhaps a little been neglected, but there are actions in place to deal with those. But I think it's something that's worth considering. Thank you.
Just to remind people, we're dealing with questions from people who aren't members of the committee first. So is there anybody else who's not a member of the committee who wants to make a point or ask a question that hasn't already been asked? No? Okay, in which case we'll move on to the members of the committee. Councillor Taylor, you were clearly indicating first.
Very much, Chair. Bit of thunder stolen there from the various members behind, which is absolutely brilliant to hear, because a lot of my comments were going to be actually on the adults, actually, regarding the fact that our population is moving 30% to over 65 within 2 years, I think it is now, and we've got to basically accommodate them, really. So we've been going around these properties for 15 years, I think it is, and washing them out, washing them down, looking in and looking back, and still we haven't got a positive direction where we're going, which I don't knock because we're now looking at it. But my question is today that we are supposed to be looking at the housing stock of the Dorset, which we've just been told we're going to build 50,000 houses in. So are we not sweating our assets to make sure we are not building for the future of our elderly population and our new families, which I must emphasise we're not looking at as well. So my question is, are we going towards that direction of new properties for our holdings already to go forward to make sure we safeguard our community of our elderly population and our children and new families? Thank you, Chair.
Who wants to answer that question?
I'll have a go. I mean, clearly, at this moment in time, we're not in the business of building houses or council houses. That could possibly change, but I doubt it. So this is looking at our existing housing stock, which is quite very, very limited. It's about the process that we strategically look at it. It will be the Dorset plan which will determine the priorities that will then deliver, and any asset will be managed in accordance with this plan. So it's not specific to that issue, I think, if that helps.
That's the emphasis I'm trying to point now, is that we've got enough chat going on, and excuse me, Richard, I'm not being Councillor Biggs. Sorry, I'm Councillor Taylor from Chalmers St Mary, and I represent Vice Chair of Planning as well of Dorset Council. But my concern is that we now have to move at speed, because the current language from central government and across the county is not NIMBY, but YIMBY. So we've got to really start moving fast now. And we've got to really understand what we've got and what we can deal with, because there is money there from central government. It's just a question of moving it in the right direction. So that's my question again. Can we have some speed on this, please?
I think it's a fair point, but I don't think it directly relates to the report we're considering today. Today is really about the existing stock of assets and how we're managing those. What happens in terms of housing policy and house building will clearly be driven by whatever central government targets are set for us and the new local plan accordingly. But that will be dealt with differently and as part of the council's housing policy, not part of this. Very quickly.
Negotiation with from this panel, because I don't understand why we're not actually working collectively together to making sure that we're actually delivering for Dorset what it needs. That's my question.
Julian, I believe you had an answer.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I mean, two things I think just to say. I mean, the first thing to say is, in a sense, this illustrates the point that Councillor Biggs was making about the tensions that are inherent in the strategy, and which I obliquely referred to in my earlier remarks, because actually there are tensions between, do you want to do one thing? Do you want to support hotels? Do you want to develop accommodation? Do you want to maintain farmland? And some of the others. So we are illustrating the complexity of the strategy by this very debate. Now, it's not for me to put words in your mouth and say that this should be your priority or that should be your priority, but it is perfectly legitimate for you to recommend and for Cabinet to consider whether housing and adult care is your prime priority, and you want the strategic asset management plan to deliver more of that than of other things. And in a sense, you're illustrating what I was encouraging you about prioritisation earlier. I think I'm almost duty bound to remind you, though, that in doing so, you can't have everything. But I think the debate illustrates the point. Thank you, Chair.
Well, can I recommend a proposal forward then that we actually look at that to be scrutinised, or look to go forward, actually looking at creating a panel to go forward with this? Yeah? Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Northam was next.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Northam, member for Upwey and Broadway in Weymouth, and I'd like to thank the group for bringing forward this strategic asset management plan. I think it's very necessary two-point direction. It's been pointed out to me that the priorities are largely set in the Dorset Council plan, and this is subsidiary to that. I do note on the, sorry, just a little bit on Weymouth. Dorset Council are the biggest asset owner, property owner in Weymouth. There are some 67 seafront properties approximately that are on long-term leases. Some are in good condition, some are at size. There's a lot of work needs to be done there. If you read the English Heritage Report on Weymouth, it commends the old Weymouth and Portland Borough Council for its investment in that property in order to protect the Georgian seafront. So that's why there is so much property in that area owned, but we need to move on. There's also significant sites that are currently car parks, big car parks. They've been bulldozed, and there's proposals in the local plan, the extant local plan, to develop these areas as part of the town centre master plan, and those need to be brought forward. To the report itself, I'm pleased to see that one of the priorities is providing land to enable delivery of affordable, suitable housing, which echoes what's been said. However, I don't think the report, in its detail, expands enough on that topic. It's in the diagram, but it's rarely mentioned. You struggle to find the word housing, affordable housing, and such like. I think there needs to be more emphasis on this. I would also comment that there's a reference in the report trying to find some detail of the strategy is fine, the process seems reasonable, but where's the detail? It's all in the annexes, appendices and such like, and this is a reference to Appendix 6. I can't find Appendix 6. It doesn't seem to exist yet. So my question is really, when do we get the asset reviews completed, and how do we move forward with them? What's the process for moving forward with them, which I think relates to potentially to panels, but I think the Dorset Council plan does set the rules. So if you could confirm to me, if the officers could consider how they can put more emphasis on, I think it's number two, the affordable, suitable housing. And the second part of the question is, when will we actually get the visibility of the assets, risk, the prioritisation and the priority plans? Thank you.
Who wants to answer that one?
Interim head of asset strategy and development. There is a 3-year rolling programme of asset reviews which has started this year. The intention is that each asset class review will result in a strategy for that class of assets, which would come through the internal council governance, property strategy and asset management group up through CASAM and then to the relevant committee for consideration.
Sorry, could I have a follow-up to that? Because I'm pleased that you're here, Jessica. And over the last 5 years, the Economic Growth and Regeneration team has been understaffed and gone through a number of managers. And the progress on this asset review has been dreadfully slow. I'm hoping we can turn that around. So I'd like to not just know it's going to happen in the next 3 years, I'd like to know what's going to happen next and when the dates are for the reviews, which I understand are underway. So it doesn't have to be now, but I'd like to see some dates rather than a 3-year rolling programme answer, please. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Gibson was next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Simon Gibson, representing the Verwood Ward, former portfolio holder for economic growth and levelling up. I mention that because prior to the change in administration in the council, both Councillor Parry and I had a chance to shape some of the early work that Julian and Jessica have done on bringing the SAMP to us today. And broadly, I think it's a very good document, and thank you both for your work to get it to committee today, because one of the changes mentioned in the preamble around trying to make sure that our use of assets, our strategic asset management plan that underpins that, is about trying to make sure that it enables other council priorities. And it's immediately started the conversation about, well, what are those priorities? Which ones do we as a body want to make sure are the priorities? And if I could highlight one point again, and Julian's made it twice, absolutely right to do so, is nothing is a priority if everything is a priority. So perhaps let this document be one of the many documents that the council will produce in the next couple of years to try and define what it is as an authority we think we can do well and do best. And there's going to be competing arguments on that. And over the coming years, in particular, as we head towards the local plan, I want to make the case for economic development and economic growth, because that underpins so much of what we do. We need to grow the pie to be able to share it out to more people. If we don't do that, we will constantly limit the amount of housing we can provide, the amount of facilities that we can provide. And for me, a huge part of our asset management needs to focus on economic growth and in particular regeneration of our town centres. So when I was originally asked what some of my emphasis would be for the SAMP, that was where I asked for more of it to be beefed up. I'm really pleased to see that it has been, so thank you very much. But what underpins that is the documents in the appendices. So one of the documents that it mentions is the town centre strategy. That's still at a very early stage. It's not available to be shared at the minute because it doesn't actually exist yet. But when you're creating a plan that runs to 2030, it's absolutely right that it's acknowledged, because how we deal with our assets, particularly in our town centres, will be the key determining factor as an authority that we can use to change how those town centres function. And they will compete. I won't mention specific towns, but we hold significant asset bases in our town centres, especially in the east. And we may actually decide that having, for example, adult social care facilities there isn't the best use of the space right in the town centre. But we need to be careful not to be too prescriptive in our SAMP to say adult social care is our key priority, because therefore you might actually accidentally get in the way of what you try to do later on in actually making sure all of our assets are in the right place. So I think early on in the process, we just need to make sure that we define what it is that we want to do with our assets. And for me, that is economic growth and regeneration. I won't go on too much more about that now, but just to flag that as the priority for me. A couple of other things just to mention it. I think it's section 2 in the report. It talks about providing greater clarity for the authority about where assets sit on it. I welcome that. Regeneration in particular, it's a small team, a really good team, but often it's felt that that small team has been tasked with trying to regenerate an area as if it's the only decision maker in regeneration, and it's not. There's highways implications, there's adult social care implications, there's planning implications. So if this document was to do one really helpful thing, and I do think we might need to go further on it, it is to try and set out a pathway for how regeneration can take place. Because at the minute, it's still a little bit disjointed. And I do think for it to be effective, there needs to be somewhere in the council that takes ownership of regeneration. And for me, the team, the economic growth team, strikes me as a very sensible place to take the lead on that, alongside planning colleagues. And just the final point, Chairman, if I may, I think all of this is a good plan. I think it's the best plan we've had that I can remember, so I endorse it. But we just need to check back when it comes to budget time that the team is properly resourced. It's a small team, and it can't be a bottleneck. If we try and put all of our priorities onto the team through a strategic asset management plan, but we don't resource the team, we'll fail. So we need to make sure that it's not a bottleneck for our priorities. The same could be said for the legal services team, because a lot of the asset work then falls onto the legal services team. So if we're not resourcing that, I think we're creating a problem down the line for what we're trying to achieve through this plan. Otherwise, it's very good.
Councillor Biggs.
Thank you for those comments. I think I absolutely echo those. Economic development is a really high priority. It's going to be even higher priority. And the team are reorganising with that in mind. And there is an economic strategy which will come to us to hear. And that's being worked on as we speak. And I've got a meeting with Nick Webster next week to discuss that. There's also a seminar for all members, I think in October. So I urge you all to come to that and to put your views and how we can do that, because the role is changing from a sort of business support role to a more strategic role with the ending of the LEP. So this council will have a far greater role in shaping economic development. But we don't have all the answers, and we don't have the money to do that, but we can certainly shape it and punch above our weight, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Biggs. Councillor Jesperson next.
Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hill Foots and Upper Tarrants Ward. I'm very pleased to see this report. I absolutely welcome it. It's been a long time coming. A lot of work has gone into it, and I think it's a good strategy, and it takes us forward in a very effective way. It sets out clearly the strategic overview, the joined-up approach that we're going to be taking of using our assets in support of our wider objectives. I would absolutely support what Councillor Gibson has said, is that we then have to look carefully at the work that needs to be done to follow on to that, to how we marry up the wider strategic objectives with the competing priorities and the pathway to making this an effective piece of work or an effective way of working through to 2030. And I think there's still more work to be done. The successful outcomes, of course, of all of this will depend very much on what this turns into and the work that follows next. One of my questions is, and I've got another comment to make before you answer my question, but is about you've outlined in section 4 how this work is taken forward, and there's reference to these proposals going to Cabinet. Could I hear a little more about, before we get to the point of Cabinet, what other member input there would be into that discussion? I understand that we will be making our priorities through the council plan and the other plans, but in terms of the actual detailed discussion about the future of these assets, what will be the member input into that? That's my first question. And then one comment I just have to make is that when we're talking about prioritising these assets, it's really important to remember that these assets belong to Dorset Council, not to the areas that were the previous district councils. In other words, the assets may be in Weymouth or Ferndown, but they belong to Dorset Council. All the previous districts brought assets to the new Dorset Council. North Dorset, for example, brought very significant assets, but they're no longer here to dispose of because we used them entirely to build affordable housing on the space in Blandford that was the North Dorset Council's offices. So we mustn't confuse the fact that where the assets sit geographically with the locale where that benefit needs to be felt. The benefit from this asset strategy must be shared evenly right across the area, even though the majority of the assets may now be in the south of the county. But if I could go back to I just needed to make that statement, but if I could ask for a response on my question about the member input into this decision making. Thank you.
Councillor Biggs, do you want to? Or Julian? Yeah, go on, Julian. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chair. And just to, if I deal with the second point first, there is certainly no intention in the draft of the strategy that there should be any division by geography or by former constituent body. This is a strategy for Dorset Council. The first point on terms of involvement, well, of course, you will know better than I how the council plan is scrutinised and developed, and obviously the first revision of this document will no doubt be in the light, both as Jess said in her opening remarks, in terms of the KPIs and also any policy changes that need to be either reinforced or strengthened. So that I think is the first thing. I think the other important thing, of course, to say is that each of those constituent strategies that she listed and that you've seen in the appendix, clearly there'll be member involvement and consultation on those. And no doubt both local ward members and I'll call it a varying range of members, because no doubt some of them will be cabinet decisions and some of them won't, but decisions on specific assets will of course receive appropriate consultation and engagement at the right time. So I think there is a programme of involvement and engagement that will emerge over time.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman. As I said before, you and I faced in a former scrutiny committee having this report come into us. I think it was we dealt with, I think it was 5 different report authors. There was no continuity. It was a frustration for us. It was a frustration for the previous administration. Officers come and go. Hopefully now we've got a settled team. They've produced a really good report here. But that continuity obviously has been an issue, which is why it's taken us so long to get to this place. What underpins the asset strategy programme was always that disposal, repurposing and retaining of the assets that we've got. We're in a position where, in terms of estate costs, according to the report, is 13.5 million to maintain every year. And the income we're getting from that is 4.1 million. So it's just not sustainable, so something has to be done. I would hate to see a fire sale, but we do need to repurpose a lot of our estate. And going back to Councillor Taylor's point, we know that we've seen recently, and I think it's an 800% increase within the housing team for trying to deal with homelessness and such like. So we need to look at how we're going to reduce the costs of that to the council. It's so high, and it's having such a burden on the financial position of the council. So part of that repurposing of the estate may be a direction in which we could go, which I think was to answer the question you were trying to get to. And I fully agree with Councillor Gibson's later point that we need to ensure that the team is properly resourced to bring that about. We need to be more visionary and more expansive in how we're going to deal with the estate going forward. But I do commend the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, next.
I see at long last we're getting some clarity here. The fact is that the focus and direction we're going. This is the question overall from, I think from all of us really, is the fact is we've got the facts. When are we going to deal with them? Because the fact is we've been dealing for years. And the people are not expecting us to keep holding back. Councillor Bartlett's just said we are in debt to a lot of the properties, you know, to 8 million quid. That's a lot of money. It's kicking around that we can't afford to spend. So we need speed on this, proper speed, proper direction, proper resourcing for our teams, and also a direction of speed, going fast as quick as we can, but not losing sight of what we're actually trying to achieve. That's my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure what the question was there, but
Get a purpose of our direction established properly, not the 1 to 3 year programme. I'm sorry to say that, but not the 1 to 3 year programme, because you've already gone through 10. And I don't want another 3 years, and then it's another administration. So that's the question. What are we going to do about it?
well, I think that's the whole point, is that we're making a recommendation which will go to Cabinet, and we'll deal with this. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Look, that's part of, as Julia mentioned, the inherent tensions within the strategy, because it's both a short-term and a long-term strategy, which makes it quite a challenge, because if you're going to attempt to do regeneration and start the clock today, regeneration is measured in decades, not even years, let alone anything like months. And to do it properly and making sure that we make good use of our assets does take time. Because to make sure that, you know, once you've sold the asset, it's gone. If you repurpose it, that's fine, but it can be quite hard to change from it again. And it's that tension again between the short-term needs that the council's got, not just on finance, but in terms of, for example, our housing waiting list, for example, versus allowing enough space for economic growth to truly take place. And I just want to, without an answer yet, Chairman, I just want to make sure that we have enough space in the strategy to allow for economic growth to actually occur, because it doesn't take time. It doesn't happen straight away. It takes time, and it's not always easy to see it straight away. It takes a long time to see the shoots, the growth. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that in the repurposing side of the assets strategy, that we don't accidentally solve one problem but create another problem somewhere else. So it's a hard one, and I get that. There are a couple of other points I just wanted to make. I want to endorse the plan to delay putting KPIs on this. This was a point that we struggled to nail down for a long time, because actually defining what the KPIs are will be quite a challenge anyway. I'm still not sure what I think they should be. And we also need to make sure that we aren't putting in place metrics that are outside of our control, which a lot of the external factors in economic growth and asset management are outside of our control. So we need to make sure that they're very tight, so that we can actually fairly measure our progress in this, so that we're not just, again, creating a measurement by which we'll struggle to achieve. There is one last point in terms of how we perhaps might get into a more strategic space with asset management, and that is about making sure that what we can dispose of, we get on with relatively quickly. And I'm not talking about a fire sale. I completely agree with Councillor Bartlett. No need for a fire sale. However, we know that there are plenty of assets still under the management of this council that could, for example, be transferred across to our town and parish councils. We've talked about it for quite a long time. And I think if we are to try and free up some space within the team, let's early on in the process get on with that. If we do that, we dispose of what the assets that we currently hold that we don't believe are truly strategic to us and our regeneration, for example. We might then have some more space to get on with the bits that we see as priorities. So if you want to prioritise something, you need to deprioritise something else. And for me, getting rid of the assets that we don't intend to use as soon as possible is a good way to do that, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson next.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, while we're thinking about in general terms, the prioritising that we will have to do to decide what we're going to do, how we're going to maximise these assets. We need to understand that this won't just be, we will make a list of priorities and housing will be, might be 1 or 2 or whatever, and therefore that's where the assets will go. We're also going to have to understand where an asset can usefully contribute to that priority and where it perhaps can't. So it's not going to be a simple discussion of this is top priority, therefore we'll use the assets for that. This is the second priority. It's a much more nuanced discussion than that. We're going to have to understand where assets can contribute to the outcome of that priority, and there will be some really high priorities where actually the assets don't have much to offer. So I think we shouldn't be being too dogmatic too early on about what we need to be using these assets to support in terms of the council plan. It's a nuanced, it's an iterative procedure that to work that out, and it will take a little bit of time. I appreciate we need to work at pace, but we also need to do it properly.
Thank you, Councillor Chichester. Councillor Biggs, and then I would like to try and draw something together that we could... Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there, sorry.
Sorry, you want me to speak or somebody else?
Apologies, I thought you were indicating to Councillor Biggs. 3 quick points. First, an endorsement of Councillor Gibson's statement in relation to one of those priorities being economic development, and how we use our assets to achieve that, and some of the comments he was making around making level-headed decisions, particularly in relation to town centre properties and how we utilise that for economic development. The other thing I would also like to agree with him with is about how we can look to take a staggered, we can take a different approach to different kinds of assets. For, I don't think we should be afraid of, we like to call it disposing of assets, which sounds a little bit over the top, but actually there are different ways that we can dispose of an asset. I'm going to give you an example in my ward. There is a play park that Dorset Council owns, 1 street away from one that the parish council manages. Dorset Council send a team out, 30 minutes drive to cut the grass, to do the maintenance checks that are required for a play park, which is presumably a weekly health and safety inspection, where actually we could dispose of that liability. The grass could be cut more regularly. The parish council can invest in that play park and the community can get a better asset, but we have disposed of an asset. And I think actually we should look to take quite a simplistic approach to low value assets such as that. There should be a standardised agreement that we have with trusted partners, parish councils, third party sectors, what used to be in the old days called the one estate model, so that we can just get those assets out back to our communities, put them in charge of them and actually get them working for our communities. And yes, there should be significantly more due diligence when it comes to higher value and more strategic assets. But disposing of a verge here or there so that it can be better looked after by the community, to me, seems a bit of a non-brainer, particularly if we can reduce that £9 million a year that we are spending on just sort of keeping the lights on for our assets. And I want to finish with a specific question to the officer who's very kindly given up her morning to speak to us. In the former East Dorset area in particular, we have quite a unique situation with a number of assets that are owned by Dorset Council, which are leftovers from when the housing associations were set up and the social housing stock was passed over. In most places that included things like footpaths, roads, things like that. But in East Dorset, some of those public realm spaces remained with East Dorset District Council and now with Dorset Council. And I'd like to give you a quick example of the implications that can have. In my ward specifically, we have a place called Chase Crescent. I don't expect you to have heard of it. It's 10 former social housing buildings on the outskirts of Sixpenny Hanley. The road is owned by Dorset Council, but it is not a public highway. It is an asset. There is no budget put aside for these specific assets. So when the good people of Chase Crescent came to report the myriad of potholes in front of their driveways, the highways system and the highways department turned around and goes, it's not a highway, we don't look after private land. To which they obviously then came to me and said, you know, if you and I were standing on this road, it looks like a highway. You know, Dorset Council own this. And then you go back to the assets team and they go, well, it's a highway. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that the buy-in from other departments around the council is likely to be positive when we're looking to support their objectives. How are we going to use those relationships to make sure that that buy-in is positive when it may be looking to increase their liabilities? Because people get very defensive over their budgets.
Yes, I accept everything that you've said. There's currently a piece of work underway across the Place Directorate looking at exactly that. So looking at those assets which are have the potential to fall between the cracks of different departments. The aim of that piece of work is to ensure that we take a much more collective approach across Place to ensure that those assets are maintained effectively and where appropriate can be transferred through community asset transfers.
Okay, Councillor Biggs, and then I'm going to draw this to a close.
Yeah, I think the key point is that we know some things very well about our state and other bits of the state we don't know that well. And the key is the property assessments which are in here, because we can't make informed decisions about whether we keep, repurpose or even dispose unless we really understand that asset. And frankly, we don't in many cases. So that is key. And it also looks within the text on page 27 about where there's dual delivery, and it could be, you know, there's duplication, etc. Though it's a really good point when it involves that assessment probably wouldn't talk to town and parish councils if there's something similar. So I think that is a really good point that we might need to pick that up or have a conversation to ensure that we're looking across people doing similar things. I think that's really key. But that will perhaps come out after when it goes to committees to decide what we're going to do with it. Thank you.
Thanks again, Councillor Biggs. Right, I think I'd like to draw this to a close. Broadly speaking, I think the impression I get is that members are broadly in favour of the paper before us and are happy with most of the things there. But the specific other things which need sorting out really is about prioritisation. And the comments were made several times about if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. And clearly there's still work to be done in terms of defining exactly what the council's priorities are. But then that makes sense in this, you know, bear in mind that we're just starting putting the the Dorset Council plan together, and that will be a key part of how we deal with these matters. So I think clearly there's more work to be done on KPIs. There's more work to be done on prioritisation. There's certainly more work to be done on affordable housing and Appendix 2 and fleshing that out. Some members undoubtedly will think we don't need to do anything ourselves as authority. Other members might have a very different view about that. But it's a debate that we're going to have over the next few months, and it will have a big impact on the council going forward. So I think that's broadly what we've all been discussing. I'm sure Lindsay has taken notes, and if I've missed anything out, we'll make sure that your comments are put back in there for when it goes towards Cabinet. So thank you all very much, and we'll finish this item then. Thank you. Right, then moving on to item 8, the local enforcement plan. And yes, sorry, is it Darren? Yes.
Thank you. It's Darren Hobson, Planning Enforcement Manager. First, I would say that the enforcement itself is defined as an action by an officer which encourages compliance with legislation. The currently adopted enforcement plan that we have in place at Dorset was adopted around 2019, And because of the new relevant law and guidance that's come forward since that date, it requires updating. I'm hoping that you've all managed to read Appendix 2. Key changes that we've put forward for the proposed local enforcement plan is that we providing a user with a clear and plain English guide on the processes that are involved with all enforcement investigations. It's the guidance on how to raise a complaint initially and what necessary information is required within that complaint. Provides the timescales that are to be expected when registering the initial complaints. It highlights the Dorset Council and how we prioritise those complaints it receives and the timescales to be expected for an initial site visit by an enforcement officer. Provides a step-by-step guide showing the process of an enforcement investigation. I've included a flow chart at the bottom of that document which explains it for you to easily work your way through. It also provides advice on all other aspects of the planning service, including works to trees, list of buildings, section 106, SIL, BNG, and minerals and waste. All departments have had an input in this document. The local enforcement plan document sets out Dorset Council's approach to all things enforcement related for planning, in line with the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, the National or NPPF for ease, explains that effective enforcement is important to maintain the public confidence in the planning system, but enforcement action is a discretionary and LPA should act proportionally in responding to those suspected breaches. It also goes on to explain that LPAs should publish a local enforcement plan to manage enforcement proactively in a way that's appropriate to their area. This sets out how they will investigate the alleged cases of enforcement, unauthorised development, and take action where it is appropriate. In November 2023, we had a review of the local enforcement plan was required as a result of the Ombudsman response. So in January of this year, we undertook an audit of the Planning Enforcement Service. The final report that was presented in March of this year suggested that there was generally a sound system of governance and risk management and control in place, but there were some scope for improvements. The findings that we had presented to us, finding 4 specifically relates to the local enforcement plan and that we should look to review that and align with the Ombudsman's recommendation. Now, the local enforcement plan as Appendix 3, which I hope you've all managed to have time to read, explains in plain English, again, Dorset Council's approach to all enforcement matters in line with the NPPF, and it explains the Council's priorities for investigation. It explains that the Council's general discretionary powers regarding planning enforcement. It's designed and drafted to provide a common reference point and guidance on a range of options that are available to achieve those outcomes, intended for all users, town and parish council elected members, members of the public, and anyone that's interested in planning and enforcement. As I say, Appendix 3 is attached to the document, which sets out the local enforcement plan, and I'm asking you to support and refer this to Cabinet with a view to adopting. The local enforcement plan also should be read in conjunction with the Council's current Dorset Council General Statement of Enforcement Policy, which is Appendix 1. This document sets out the general principles of the Council and how it will follow in relation to investigations, enforcement, prosecutions as part of the regulatory functions. And further advice is also available again from the National Planning Policy Guidance, which is published by central government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just to remind members, first off, we have questions from people who are not members of the committee. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for the report and also for the briefing that we had last week or week before, which provided further detail. And I welcome the plain English copies that are attached with this report. It's very helpful. Planning speak and enforcement speak can be or can appear to be complex, but actually, when it's set out in this way, it's very helpful. At our briefing, you provided the structure of planning enforcement teams. And in your service aims here, you seek to provide an efficient and effective planning enforcement service within the resources available while treating all our customers with courtesy, respect and fairness. At the briefing, it was clear that one area appeared to have more part-time officers than all the other areas. So I would ask that in terms of the fairness, I would question that that particular area is not necessarily be treated fairly.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Darren Hobson, Planning Enforcement Manager. To put more of a clarity on that area that's in question, the officers in that area are literally hours out of being full-time. One officer particularly has only dropped literally 3 hours, so he's almost full-time. In fact, he always does over and above his hours anyway. The second officer that was pointed out, again, he does, it's just the 1 day a week, but he does extra hours to compensate for that day. So on paper, they're literally stated as part-time. However, in hours and on operation-wise, we're literally talking about a couple of hours. So for that particular area, all officers are maintaining the caseloads. All cases that are opened in that particular area, we've got statistics that show that the cases opened and complaints received, on balance, are being closed within a matter of 8 weeks. So at this point in time, I don't have any concerns in that area.
Did you want to come back on anything of that? Okay.
Thank you for that clarity. I absolutely respect the work that our enforcement or your enforcement officers carry out, and I have had dealings with them in various enforcement issues, and they do sterling work, very challenging at times. I had asked for a breakdown of areas on the number of enforcement cases. I think I asked that through that briefing, which I haven't yet received. So I'd be grateful to receive that, a breakdown of area, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yes, Darren Hobson, Planning Enforcement Manager. Yes, that's absolutely, we can supply that for you as soon as we possibly can.
Right, I believe online we've got Councillor Jill Taylor. You've got a question you want to ask.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I will be honest, I haven't read these papers in detail, which I should have done. I do apologise for that. Within my ward in Chickerell, we have a couple of temporary campsites. What I'm concerned about are the wider aspects of these temporary campsites. They have to have planning permission, but when it comes to enforcement and they're not acting appropriately, by the time, my experience is by the time enforcement are actually getting there to do something, they're virtually closing down for the winter. Is there anything within this enforcement policy that would address this so that within these temporary campsites where there is a breach of planning, it can be acted on more swiftly so that basically they're not allowed to operate to the end of the season and then start sorting out the details in closed season if they feel like doing it? Thank you.
Anna Lee, Service Manager for Development Management and Enforcement. Thank you for raising the point. In terms of this local enforcement plan, it doesn't go into sort of case-specific detail, so each case would be considered on its merits, and the aim of the plan is to set out the processes that the council would go through. But just to respond on that specific question, we are aware of the issue, and one of the things we can consider is having, for example, template reports and notices ready so that the council can act more swiftly in some cases. That's something we can give thought to. And I would also highlight that the local enforcement plan was, as Darren mentioned, one of the actions arising from the audit. It does sit alongside a number of other actions that we are seeking to take forward to ensure our services are effective and efficient as possible. And one of those relates to reviewing all of our templates as well, which may again link back to that question. Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Jill?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councillor Parry next.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the reasons behind the fragile public confidence in enforcement that I've observed in my West Parley ward in recent times has been that we're often asked to refer an individual matter to enforcement, and that doesn't reach a threshold. But often the matters relating to or of concern go across a number of areas. So they might well be a blocking of a public right-of-way or a vehicle obstruction. There might also be things like operating a business from a residential property. In isolation, those thresholds for enforcement haven't been reached, but the sum of the whole part really does make it a social concern in our wards. And I suspect other councillors have had similar experiences. What we want to understand is, how do we really get to articulate our concerns to enforcement, that you understand the whole picture, that holistic approach, and then we can see some effective enforcement, as opposed to the sense that people feel we're a bit toothless in enforcement, if I can be blunt about it at times, and even to the extent that we may not be seen to even care about it, when of course the reverse is actually true. We care about having an orderly society, and our communities feel valued and can go about their business in a orderly way. And there's that sense of frustration that even when enforcement do step in, that those that you seek to enforce it will just kick the can as far down the road as possible. And this can rumble on for years, in some cases even decades. So what we really want to understand is what can be done about that inside your papers today.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Darren Hobson. All complaints are dealt with on priority basis. So we always consider the harm of each complaint that is received. All complaints that are received through the online reporting form are set through a case allocation, which is every Tuesday and Thursday morning, with senior enforcement officers who go through those complaints, and they have to prioritise each and every one of those complaints that are received. A large majority of those complaints that are received are not matters for planning enforcement at all. As you say, highway matters, blocking of driveways are not planning enforcement matters. As you've alluded to, that there is a crux of issues where a business is operating from a home that would affect locality as a result of their operations. So whether there's someone, for example, parking vehicles along the street, blocking driveways, we have to work in connection with highways to try and resolve that issue. There is a lot, as you say, there's a lot of processes, and unfortunately, planning and enforcement is weighted heavily in the favour of the person. So it is their options to, whenever we serve notices, whenever we deal with them, they go forward and obtain the services of an agent who, unfortunately, most half of the time has got a heavy background in planning enforcement. They know the processes that we have to follow. We go by the guidelines set by local government through the NPPF and the NPPG, which is why we hopefully push this enforcement policy or plan forward to provide a step-by-step guide on how we wish to operate to improve the service. I hope that answers a little bit of your question.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just start by thanking Mr. Hobson for the report that he's written. As members, I think most members know that when we started on this council authority in 2019, the previous administration took the decision to hit transformation hard and early, which was the right thing to do, which has put us in a position that we're in 5 years on as a local government authority, being in such a good position because we weren't have that duplication within our services and with our costings. But one of the things that was towards the end of the transformation and got held up a bit was our enforcement. We finally had an officer in place who could write a really good enforcement policy, who come with a lot of experience to the table, had written enforcement policies before. And I share Councillor Parry's frustration around enforcement being somewhat toothless, I think was the phrase used. It's a frustration with the officers and with members that unfortunately enforcement doesn't necessarily have the legal direction that it needs. It needs to change with legislation from government. And so that's where the lobbying needs to be done, is with government, to ensure that enforcement within local government authorities have far much more power than they currently have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I'm sure we all agree with your comments and sentiments there. Councillor Jesperson next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hillfoot and Upper Townsboard. First of all, this is a very helpful report. Thank you very much. It's always good to hear from enforcement because, as you all know, this is an area of work within Dorset Council that's really close to the hearts and really important to many of our residents. And they do have a very high expectation of what enforcement can do for them in their communities. And so it matters a great deal. You're quite a small team, but you're very, very important to the residents. So it's really good to see this report coming forward and to be having this discussion. Before I get to my main point, if I could go back to the really useful point and really pertinent point raised by Councillor Parry about people coming to the enforcement team with a problem in their neighbourhood. They come to enforcement because that's what they think it is, and it transpires it's not an enforcement problem. I think that we as a council need to handle that situation better than we do. What happens at the moment is enforcement look at it, they say this is not an enforcement matter, and they bat it back to the resident and possibly saying you need to raise this with highways. What the resident expects to have happened is that you, who they think sits in an office next to the highways guys, you know, because we're all old-fashioned, they expected you to pass it to highways or to conservation or to planning, not to just bat it back to them. And so could we as a team, this is not a criticism enforcement, because the same happens when we go to highways and they say this is enforcement. There's a joined up response which would be much more courteous to our residents and would give them a much more positive feeling about our responsiveness. I'm not expecting you to answer that, but can I just leave that thought? And as I say, this isn't just about enforcement, it's about how everybody responds when you get a query that's not yours, what we do with that. So can I just leave that thought with you all, as it were? The main point I want to make about this is that a lot of the issues that arise around enforcement and the public not the lower level of public satisfaction with enforcement than we would wish for, or than that you feel you deserve, frankly, arises because of the residents don't know clearly enough what to expect when they raise a problem. And this is in part due to communication. Now, I know that you've said you've written this in plain English, but there's a task that we're clearly not succeeding in explaining to the residents what's going to happen and when they will hear next, and also in including the local members in that. Now, you say that you've written this in plain English, but you've used phrases like technical breach of planning conditions and discretionary service. Now, to all of us in this room, that is plain English. To the majority of my residents, neither of those phrases is plain English. What does a technical breach of a planning condition mean if you've never had anything to do with the planning? What even does discretionary service mean? And what's the implications of that? So I would urge you to go back to this document and put it into what I would class as plain English. It's clear and it's well written, but it's not in plain English. And until we get that, and until we start addressing the question of providing enforcement responses to residents in the language that they understand, not the language that we have to use in order to be legally robust and safe, then we will always have this dissonance between what they expected to happen and what actually happened. And I think if we really address that, that is solvable. That doesn't cost any more money, it doesn't cost any more time. It's just put yourselves in the position of Mrs. Miggins, our famous person in the planning department. Mrs. Miggins, she asked a question, and what language does she want that response to come back, and what help does she want if it's not an enforcement case? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's Darren Hobson. Thank you very much for that, Councillor. And I do agree with you with a lot of terminology that's used. I have tried to cut out a lot of the gumph that's normally put into documents. If I may as well, there was a television programme called Here Comes the Planner, which really damaged planning enforcement everywhere. I mean, this is not the first council I've operated in, and this is certainly not the first. When people saw that television programme, they assumed a planning enforcement officer can literally go around on day one and knock down a building. That is not the case. Planning enforcement is a long and drawn-out process and can be, as I think one of the other councillors already mentioned, go on for years and years. The local government, as a result of LURA, more recently, have just changed the time scales for immunity from 4 years to 10 years across the board. Obviously, we've got an overlap currently for the next few years, but that's in line with trying to get more of these things that have been lost and slipped through those nets to be captured. I will review some of the wording that's in there. As you said, I'll try and get my nan to read it to make sure she understands exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just while we're on this subject, of course, it has to be, we have to say this every time, there's a massive responsibility on ward members to be the communication bridge between enforcement and our residents, because we need to understand, and all of us have to take responsibility for understanding in some detail how enforcement works, because we have to manage the expectations of our residents that the enforcement officer is not going to come round and knock the extension down next Tuesday. You know, that it probably won't get knocked down at all, and if it does, it might take 10 years. So there's a big responsibility on ward members in that space as well. Thank you.
Right. A few people indicating they want to speak on this. It's possible that some of you are about to say the same thing, but John Andrews and Matt Piles both indicated about the same sort of time. So maybe about to say the same thing. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. John Andrews. I'm a Cabinet Member for Police Services. I know in response to Councillor Jesperson's first point, our Corporate Director, Matt Piles, who looks after both highways and planning, will respond.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I'm actually saddened from what I've been hearing this morning about how we're not communicating to the public and ward members what we do in Dorset Council. As the Director of Highways and Planning, that's my responsibility. So I'm going to take away what's been said and reflect on how we can improve, and I'll come back, Chair, if I may. Can I just say one thing is that the planning enforcement team do a tremendous job under huge pressure. And we do enforce to the point that we go to the courts. But it's not something we can shout about in some respects because it's potentially ongoing and there are people involved with the enforcement cases, particularly neighbours who are involved with some of the enforcement cases, and we have to be sensitive to that. In Dorset Council, sometimes we don't shout what we do. and we need to get better at that and get better at communicating with our ward members. Today is about focusing on harm. So one of the things I've learned as a director of planning is most of the enforcement cases we deal with aren't actually enforcement cases themselves. What we need to do as an authority is make sure that we deal with the listed building enforcement issues that are causing harm, and we need to take on board the serious concerns that are raised by our residents and our communities. So, Chair, if I may, I need to reflect on what's been said today, and we will come back to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Gibson, I think, was next, actually. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Simon Gibson, Verwood Ward. I actually wanted to speak and say how pleased I was with a lot of what's in the document. I wasn't able to attend the members' briefing, unfortunately, due to a work commitment, but when reading the papers ahead of today's meeting, I thought it was one of the clearer reports that I've seen on planning enforcement for a while in terms of two aspects. One, the timescale set out for how you prioritise enforcement. Really helpful to us as a councillor for that, because when something comes into our inbox, it is obviously often needing dealing with, but not necessarily urgently dealing with. And it's very helpful for me to be able to try and explain some of those timescales, especially for the site visit, because that's often where it transfers from a ward councillor to your team for taking it forward. So from my point of view, that was really helpful. And then the bit beyond that then went on to explain how the different options for enforcement that you might take. Very helpful, one of the clearest I've seen that set out in a while, so thank you for that. Within it, there's a couple of bits that trouble me, and the main bit comes around tree management and TPOs. I know this is difficult, and hence the reason it's in box number 1 to be dealt with as quickly as you can, because how often do councillors get a call, panicked from a resident to say they're cutting down a tree? We've got to go through the process quite quickly of trying to work out, has the tree potentially got a TPO on it? And you know, you're trying to do that all the while the chainsaws are going, which makes it incredibly difficult and stressful for us as councillors, non-planning experts all the while that we are. I've always found planning enforcement to be very responsive once I can get to that stage, and I know it can get overloaded at certain times. But one of the things I would like us to consider when we are improving this document before it goes to the next stage is a bit what Matt Piles was saying there is, this is a public-facing document. And I think, I do wonder if this is maybe where we can be more robust in what our intentions around TPOs would be. Once it gets to the courts, it's difficult. You're dealing with specific cases. It's got legal matters attached to it. It's very, very hard to be robust in public until the legal judgment comes out the other side. I think we therefore might miss a trick by not being as tough as we possibly can be early on. So I think if we could strengthen that up, I think that might help, because we do need to set out our intentions for trees, because I'm afraid I might be a bit cynical when it comes to how trees are treated sometimes by certain people. I think replanting a tree is simply not enough in lots of occasions, especially if it's a tree that takes hundreds of years to grow. I personally would like to see a far more robust approach to how we manage the punishment for cutting down trees that have a TPO. Ignorance isn't bliss on that. The tree's cut down by that point. So however we decide to do that, I think this document would be the place for that to be set out as clearly as we can. And then, so that's my main point that I wanted to make, Chairman. The second point was just a small one, which is about when planning enforcement comes into the planning system. I've got a couple of examples in my ward where planning enforcement really does need to be taken. And I think we as an authority understand that. The planning enforcement team have been brilliant. They've come out exactly on the timescale set out there. But then it's sort of left in a holding pattern because there's an application in. And I find that really frustrating, because there's one application in my ward in particular that's been in for years. And without predetermining that planning application, I'll be very careful with what I say. I have a suspicion that we will come and enforce on that at some point. And that's my residents' expectation of what they would like the council to do. And without getting into the specifics at all, it feels like sometimes planning enforcement is slightly, it's got one hand tied behind its back, because if you are canny, you can put in multiple applications. And in this one particular thing, there's been loads of different applications, which means that actually at what point can we realistically say, or us as ward councillors say to our residents, yeah, we'll do something about that? Because at the minute it feels really frustrating. It feels like ward councillors are often holding a lot of responsibility for something that we can't move through the system. And I suspect you might well say to us, we also can't move it through the system. But given that we're talking about planning enforcement, it is a frustration that I have that I don't know how to solve.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Darren Hobson, Planning Enforcement Manager. I totally understand your comments there. With regards to the second element first, the planning enforcement team must, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. So, it was. Sorry, could I just ask you to repeat your second point? Sorry.
So, thank you. I suspect it might just be a whinge that I'm getting off my chest, but it's about planning enforcement almost having to take a step back because there's an application in the system. And I suspect, I understand the reason for that. There's no point in enforcing something if we might then give it planning permission. But the planning system, especially for something that's not just a simple householder application, can take a long time. And I'm very happy to speak to you outside of this about the specific, but it's been going on for years.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just getting over, got a perforated eardrum, so I'm struggling at the moment to listen to things. So yes, unfortunately, as I've said before, it is weighted heavily in the person's interests all the way along. Planning enforcement, as I've said, discretionary. I'll have to use a different word for that. But it's ultimately, planning enforcement, we don't have to take enforcement action. It is a last resort. We must negotiate, and that's what National Planning Policy Framework suggests. If the person is working with us to resolve an issue by submitting a planning application, it isn't considered proportionate or reasonable for us to take action at that point in time. And unfortunately, as you've said, agents often come from planning enforcement backgrounds. I know several planning enforcement managers that have gone down the dark side, and they do exactly that. They work to find wriggle room and holes in things, and they know that by putting applications in, it kicks the can down the road a little bit further. And they know that we, as a planning enforcement service, are restricted in what we can do. Whenever a person is working with the council, more often than not, unless there's severe harm, we must work with them and negotiate with them. To your point on trees, since I've started here at Dorset Council, I've been working strongly with Alison Turner, the Service Manager for Trees and Conservation. We have changed the way we operate. Now, trees, listed buildings are all criminal offences, not necessarily planning enforcement deal with it because that's the element that we deal with. Often we've got a lot of ex-police officers in our service, so know how to deal with a criminal element. Now, those processes, we have to work in connection with those specialist teams. Now, those specialist teams, as we probably already know, are already stretched quite thinly. So when we take action for someone chopping a tree down, we must first of all get advice from the tree team, whether or not it is a TPO, is it a conservation area, would they allow the work to be undertaken? Have they already allowed the work to be undertaken that we don't even know about? So ideally, we'd love to stick our little blue light on and whiz out there and stop the chainsaws. Unfortunately, we have a process that we have to follow before that. And sometimes it can take longer than we would anticipate. But we are working on that, and we are working really closely with the tree and conservation team on that.
Thank you very much. And I expected that answer, and I understand how you get to that. It makes sense to me. I think a lot of it, we've mentioned it in other reports, a lot of it's about capacity, I suspect. But part of it, I wonder, is the communication of this report to people. There'll always be people that will not see the report. They're going to do what they're going to do anyway, and we will follow the processes set out in the report to take action afterwards. But I suspect maybe it is a communication thing more than what's in the policy, but perhaps it's a good time to talk about it. I do feel that there's more that we can do to make people aware that if you cut down a tree that's got a TPO, there are significant consequences for doing that. And it's about a statement, enforcement in general, not just planning enforcement, is something that I think I'd like us to be more robust on. This is the point I made when I had the highways brief for a while. I feel that there are too many people that are playing the system. And actually, it's those that follow the rules often suffer the consequences of that, not those that don't follow the rules. And enforcement, as a principle across the council, is one of those tools that we have to try and maintain a good, orderly society, which is what our residents expect. So I guess perhaps not to be debated to conclusion today, but can I please just re-emphasize the point that is there more we can do to make sure that people know that there are consequences when they have these breaches?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think what I follow on from that is maybe what we should be doing is encouraging communication of this policy to parish and town councils, as they often will have the contacts in their local communities. They pass the message on to, rather than a scattergun approach where we're just sending it out fairly randomly to people. So that's right, Councillor Bryan, you indicated some time ago, I think you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Bryan, St Leonard's and St Ives. You'll be pleased to know I've taken it outside of the meeting and got the response from the officer I needed, so I don't need to ask the question now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor David Taylor.
Thank you, 3 hours coming back about the implementation of the rules and regulations that we're talking about. In TPO land, which is very close to my heart actually, because we just lost a holly tree 200 years near our ward, and that was absolutely outrageous. But things that we also include the fact of hedgerows and landscapes as well, because we often forget about them as well, because our hedgerows are thousands of years old, some of them. So perhaps you should look at that and include it in the TPO world as well. Coming back to Councillor Officer Piles, I'm sorry, Chair Piles, what word? I'm going to say you. I hear the hurt that Matthew's saying, and sorry, I'm Councillor David Taylor, Chancellor St Mary Ward and Dorchester. The reason I'm talking about because we have worked very, very closely on the A37, the A35, and we have been working for many years now to get a problem resolved for the community, for the road system, strategy, highways, everybody, because there's been a lot of work, because we had flooding problems, damage problems, etc., etc. So come back to the communications angle to the public. It's been very closely interwoven with the parish councils, the people, and the officers to achieve a common goal of conversation, to achieve the objectivity which we have now done. The thing is that's why I can say there has been massive praise from public to the officers involved. And regarding the consultation of the documents that we're talking about today, yeah, commend it. Let's go forward. Let's make some improvements. That is my proposal. Let's go forward. Thank you, Chair.
You're on, David.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Northam next.
Thank you, Chair. I thank the group for giving us a briefing on this topic ahead of this meeting. That was very useful. I failed to answer a question at that, to ask a question at that briefing, so I'd like to ask it now. The enforcement plan seems to be driven by people raising complaints. And I did wonder whether there's a separate process that is how the planning officers who approve planning in the first place check that the planning that was approved has actually been delivered. If that's there's a little paragraph in there somewhere which mentions they're involved, but I don't know whether they raise complaints through the same process or whether there's a separate process. So just if I can have some clarity on that, because I'd hope that our officers who approve things are also ensuring that what they've approved is what's delivered, rather than just relying on the public to report problems. Thank you.
Anna Lee, Service Manager for Development Management and Enforcement. We are currently reliant on the public and town and parish councils and ward members raising concerns to us around, for example, breaches of conditions or planning permissions not being implemented in accordance with the approved plans. However, there is a separate piece of work being led within the planning service, looking at potentially adding a monitoring fee into Section 106 agreements for large development sites, and to then use that fee to resource effectively more proactive monitoring. I think as officers, we want to be more proactive. Currently, we have to work within our resource, but there's a separate piece of work looking at whether that can be taken forward. Thank you.
So does that mean we don't have building inspectors and things like that at the moment? Because I thought they used to do that job, and I am catching up with what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, I should add, absolutely, we have a building control team who get out onto sites. Clearly, if they did notice anything, they would notify us. Similarly, if our planning officers are visiting a site and notice anything, they would notify us. But I think what I wouldn't want to give the impression of is that we are proactively sort of monitoring those permissions at this point. We don't have the resource to do that currently, but there's a piece of work to look into to try and to address that. In the meantime, it's more of a case obviously if another officer notices an issue, they would alert the team, but that's the extent of it at the moment.
Right, thank you. Councillor Starr.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Starr from Upton Lidship. Councillor Gibson has said much of what I wanted to say about trees, but other than the fact that they still have the vulnerability of people going in there when they acquire a site, if they go in there and cut the trees before they've got TPOs. Do I understand that TPOs can be put on by members or councillors, members of the public, anyone that is concerned about a tree, because they can see that situation arising?
It's Darren Hobson, Planning Enforcement Manager. The elements of tree TPOs and protections resolved with conservation areas is not an area that planning enforcement are dealing with. It's the tree team that put those documents forward and confirm TPOs. Now, as you said, someone can buy a plot of land and not know that there is a TPO on the site, or they do know and they ring bark the tree before we even get out there. Again, these occasions unfortunately do rise. We are limited in how we can respond because we must confirm with the tree team before we can even set out onto site to visit. Now, I don't know, if I'm honest, whether members of the public can put forward whether a tree should be protected. I'm assuming, I will check this, that members of the public can suggest to the tree team of a protection put in place, but that's not part of my role at the moment.
Thank you. I believe someone else may be able to answer that question. Before that, though, just a small point that was mentioned earlier about the sometimes onerous tasks that your officers have. Now, I wonder how well protected are they? Do they have body cameras, etc., so that would help protect them in any subsequent court case?
It's Darren Hobson, Planning Enforcement. That is an area that I'm interested in at the moment. I've worked in planning enforcement for over 20 years, and we are the front line of most abuse, unfortunately. We do report all the near misses through the current near miss policies with the council. Moving forward, I have raised the question about body cams for the team. I'm already talking to members in trading standards as an example on that. So it's something that I'm interested in moving forward. But currently, if we have a site that's potential for problems, we always have a little highlight on our teams that we go double crewed, as it were. So we're protecting ourselves in that way. We have other safeguards in place for when they attend sites, but unfortunately, as you say, we more often than not, if we got a new case, we don't know what we're going to walk into. Sometimes we can be fine, sometimes not so. It's just hit and miss, really, where we go with that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that there's been a very long and extensive questions and debate there. I haven't heard anything critical at all, but just people, broadly speaking, supportive of what you're trying to do and the resources going forward. And I believe from here it will go to Cabinet, I haven't, I'm not recommending anything additional for the report. Everyone seems to be very happy with it. So thank you very much for your work and efforts. Thank you. Right, on then to item 9, review of Dorset Council waste strategy. Yeah. Gemma. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Gemma Clinton, Head of Commercial Waste and Strategy. I've just got a quick PowerPoint presentation to run through as a way of introduction to this item. So our current waste strategy, I want to reiterate that this is a revision to our existing waste strategy, and that continues to be under review. And the waste strategy basically sets out our strategic vision, but specifically focuses on what we're going to be doing in the next 5 years, because there's been a lot of change in legislation and what we are required to do. The strategy basically details our achievements so far, the challenges we have ahead, and what legislation we need to comply with. It looks at our vision for the future, and it lists our policy objectives. I think the key point that I want to stress is that the whole strategy is underpinned by waste minimisation, reuse and recycling, because that is what improves our environmental performance and also saves money. I just want to touch on our key achievements. Hopefully you're all aware that we are the #1 unitary and disposal authority in the country at the moment, so we're very proud of that fact. We've got a really comprehensive curbside collection service that works well and is received very well by our residents. Through this collection service, when we rolled it out, we actually saved about £3.3 million a year on disposal costs. And obviously that's a year-on-year saving that we're making. So the more waste we can divert away from that black bin, the more money we save. So it's a successful service. I think this graph, which you have in the strategy, is really useful just to highlight, to demonstrate that over time, waste growth has decreased in Dorset. And you can see from the dark grey area of the graph that the landfill element has also decreased. So the sort of lighter grey is the waste treatment that we've diverted waste away from landfill. And that's a really successful story because household and population in Dorset has grown over time, and we've managed to stop that waste growth. So that in itself is a big saving to Dorset Council. One of the ways that we've made that saving and stopped that waste growth is through some of our really successful behavioural change projects, and we intend to continue with those. It's really important to engage with residents to ensure that they understand the importance of reducing their waste, reusing as much as possible, and obviously recycling as well. We also have a lot, excuse me. Sorry, we also have a lot of digital innovation within the waste team. We're very proud of our in-cab system and our back office arrangements that we have in place. And that enables us to make data-led decisions. So we have a huge amount of data. I think we've got the largest data set in the whole of Dorset Council in the waste team. We also are very successful with our income generation services, so our garden waste service, our trade waste, and we have container charging, and we want to continue with those. And we've also managed to save money through our innovative waste disposal contracts, and this has all helped towards our overall performance. So I just want to touch on the challenges ahead. I've mentioned how successful our curbside collection service is in terms of savings, and it's well received by residents. But the stark fact is 32% of what residents throw in their black bin could have been recycled at the curbside. So there's still a lot of work to do. There's a lot of efficiencies within our existing service that we can get, which will improve our environmental performance further, but also will create further savings. Excuse me. And as I've mentioned before, waste growth is an ongoing national issue. And in Dorset, we've been really successful at curbing that growth. And the graph on the right-hand side, you can see households have increased over time. You'll see the blip there, that's when we lost Christchurch. But, generally the trajectory is in an upward direction, but waste growth hasn't followed that same pattern. We also have huge challenges with infrastructure. Most of our infrastructure in waste is infrastructure that we inherited from, the district and borough councils, and much of it hasn't been updated for many years. So a lot of our depots, for example, are at capacity. We've got increasing waste or household growth, so increasing vehicles and collection rounds. We also want to grow our commercial service, again, which leads to more vehicles. So we need to develop our infrastructure. And I think one of the largest challenges ahead is the huge legislative changes. So I could probably spend an hour or more on each of these issues to explain to you some of the challenges. But in broad terms, extended producer responsibility is something that will change how waste is presented to us in the future. And also there's an opportunity for local councils to get paid for some of that recovery of packaging waste. And so we're making sure that we're maximising that. The simpler recycling reforms is something that is affecting all local authorities. It doesn't affect Dorset massively at the moment because we currently collect all of the materials that are stipulated in legislation that we're going to need to collect. So, for example, weekly food waste is going to be mandated. The items that we have to include in the system is cartons and foil, and we're looking to do that imminently. So the only real challenge around simpler recycling is in 2027, where we have to we have to add films and flexibles into the curbside collection. And we don't currently know how to do that at the moment, just because of the uncertainties on the disposal or the sorting side, if we were just to simply add it in our recycling bin. But I think from a financial point of view, the biggest thing facing us is the fact that the emissions trading scheme is going to be applied to energy from waste. So that element of treated waste, any plastic or fossil-based waste that's left in that stream will be subject to a carbon tax. And so that is a significant financial burden that's going to hit the waste industry and obviously potentially hit our purses. So we need to be ensuring that everything that we're doing enables us to comply with this legislation, but more importantly, to minimise the cost of that. Our vision for waste hasn't changed. It's to continue to be a high-performing, high-quality, efficient and value-for-money waste service that helps to make Dorset a great place to live, work and visit. And our strategic aims are about increasing recycling and composting and ensuring that we apply the waste hierarchy and fostering a circular economy. We also need to continue to deliver an effective and cost-efficient waste service, which maintains high customer satisfaction. And we want to continue to reduce the carbon emissions from the waste management service, and also to make sure we meet our statutory requirements. So the strategy is structured around 4 policy objectives designed to support the implementation and achievement of these strategic aims. And the objectives are based on a combination of national policy drivers, our legal obligations and targets, our own recycling experience and best practice, and our own aspirations. So I'm just going to touch on these 7 policy objectives briefly now. The first one is about promoting the waste reduction and reuse initiatives. Obviously, that is the most cost-effective way of dealing with our waste if people reduce it and we don't have the waste to start with. And there's 4 key areas that we are focusing on, and that is food, nappies, adult and sanitary and hygiene waste, and textiles. And the reason we're focusing on those 4 streams is because when we do waste analysis and we look in the black bin, that is what is there in Dorset that we need to focus on. And the more we can do around those areas to reduce waste, the more effective our service will be. The second policy objective is about increasing recycling and composting, and this target of 65% is in line with the national target. And that's basically maximising our current curbside service. I've already mentioned to you that 32% of what goes in the black bin is recyclable at the curbside. So there's much more we can do there. And 19% of what goes in that black bin is food waste. So there's a real focus on diverting that food waste for reduction, but also for recycling. I've already mentioned about complying with the simpler recycling reforms and needing to add additional materials into the curbside collection. And we also need to look at focusing on residual waste at household recycling centres, because again, we've done waste analysis at these sites, and from that waste analysis, we know that a significant amount of what goes into those black bin skips could have been recycled, particularly at this curbside. Our third policy objective is about ensuring that our residual waste treatment considers the waste hierarchy and cost in terms of maximising what we can get out of that residual waste. A lot of our contracts are coming to an end in the next 5 years, so a key focus for us and the team is going to be about developing our contract and disposal strategy, because if we get that right, that means we have a more cost-effective option within the service. And obviously, we need to continue to understand new and emerging technologies that are coming through. Policy Objective 4 is about developing and enhancing a network of local waste management facilities. There's currently a really good piece of work going on across all sections in place around the depot review. So it's not just focusing on waste, it's looking holistically across the board, working with asset colleagues to progress that and look at where our strategic assets needs to be going forwards. And we also need to make sure that we have suitable transfer facilities, because we don't have enough waste within Dorset to have our own facility. So therefore we need to have excuse me, strategic areas that we can bulk up materials for onward shipment. And I think it's really worth pointing out, I said earlier that we are a data-led service and we're collecting a huge amount of data. Route optimization is one of those key areas that we're focusing on, and we've been producing what we call an as-is model, which is looking at our whole area and basically having a system that we can then use to scenario model changing infrastructure locations, changing collection rounds, and actually understanding the impact that that will have. So that will help inform the infrastructure debate. Policy Objective 5 is about delivering a cost-effective waste management service. Obviously, in the current climate, this is as important as ever, and we obviously need to continue to work across the board to look at where we can make efficiencies and budget savings. And as I've said already, for us, that's about reducing, reusing and recycling as much as possible, because that's more cost-effective than disposal. And as I said, linked into that is the effective procurement of our waste contracts that are coming up. Policy Objective 6 is about providing and continuing to provide a county-wide commercial service. So we're looking to grow our commercial base in this area. So looking at the garden waste, the trade waste and container income, and also looking at other commercial opportunities that we could have. And Policy Objective 7 is by no means the last objective, but this is to reduce climate change impacts. So we've been working closely with the climate team, and we've done some benchmarking modelling work that we're going to be using to be able to monitor our carbon performance going forward. And as I said before, the route optimization software will also help with that. So I think in summary, we're asking Overview Committee to recommend the waste strategy revision to go to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to say?
Thank you very much, Chair. John Andrews, Cabinet Member for Place Services. Can I first pay tribute to the team in Waste who've done a tremendous job over the last 10 years and led by Cabinet members in the past, Laura Bellows and Jill Haynes. I think there was another one as well, I'm not sure, but also did a terrific job. But Gemma, the team, Anna Waste Acegate, who we're losing next week, who's decided to move to Pastures New, have also done a fantastic job leading the team. So all the team at the waste in the waste department have done a fantastic job. I hope you'll take these recommendations or this strategy to heart, because I know that our waste team have the best intentions of Sherborne. Oh, sorry, Sherborne. I always mention Sherborne. Of Dorset, including the climate change emergency, environmental emergency. But this reduced residual waste and the mixed waste, we've got to keep educating people. And I know something is going in to be inserted in the new Dorset magazine that we send, or Dorset paper that we send around, to try and educate people once again about some of this waste that they need to recycle. Thank you very much.
I believe Councillor Lacey Clark has got a question.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chairman. I hope you can all hear me okay in the chamber. So I'm Councillor Lacey Clark, one of the 2 members for Blandford Forum Ward in North Dorset. I have 2 strings to this question. I couldn't see in the strategy any mention of the upgrading and replacement of the fleet and modernisation of the fleet, and how that will look going forward for our waste strategy, because obviously that is responsible for collection of the day-to-day refuse. I mention this because I've noticed in the last few years a real increase in issues where the larger vehicles are unable to access a lot of the smaller residential streets in some of our historic market towns. And I think this is due to a lot of infill building where all the space that could possibly be used is being built on now, which has come with a massive effect on knock-on with parking, meaning many cars are parking overnight where they legally can, but it does block the area for lorries to come through and turn around, which has resulted in a number of collections being missed and routes not working. So as part of the route optimisation and the asset replacement strategy, I guess, for the vehicles, are we looking at investing in smaller, more nimble vehicles that will be able to navigate our market towns?
Thank you, Councillor Lacey Clark. That's very good of you. Oh, yeah, there is a fleet review going on, so that covers the whole fleet, not just the waste fleet. I know there's trials going on at the moment with the HVO vehicles. I caught that part of it, but as you know, the audio off of these screens in here is the worst audio in the world. So the rest of it was gobbledygook. And we definitely need to do something about that. Sorry, I didn't catch the rest of you. It just all blended into one as far as I'm concerned.
In that case, I apologise. Obviously, there's some kind of mics and speaker issue. I will leave it and I'll take it offline.
Yeah, please do. Happy to talk to you offline, and I'm sure Gemma will answer if this is a specific waste problem. Okay.
Okay. Councillor Jesperson next.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for this presentation. It's always, isn't it, such a joy to hear from the waste management team, because you bring us such a success story. You bring us good news. You bring us always a tale of effective management and continuous improvement. And it's a real pleasure always to hear from you and your forward plan. So thank you very much for that. And as always, I completely endorse what you're putting in this report. I just 2 or 3 points to make. The first point is, I think you've raised some really interesting points about the challenges coming forward from legislation. When you're ready, it would be really quite useful for to either through this committee or some other means to make sure that members were really well appraised of all of that, because as I said with regard to the previous item, we have a really important role about communicating, about being the communication between you and residents. So I would be very interested to know more about that when the time comes. My second is just a straightforward question. We've been waiting a really long time for the new facility at Blandford Forum. Is there any news on that? Have we got a date? I seem to remember giving it planning permission in something like 2019. So could I know when that's coming?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will answer that. Funny enough, I asked Gemma exactly the same question, exactly where are we now? And land ownership is currently illegal. So we're at the end of the throes of that one. So hopefully, we'll have some resolution by the end of the year, because you know how long legal take, don't you, Jonathan? But we'll hopefully have something by the end of the year. So hopefully, beginning of next year, we'll be able to start that. So we're looking forward to doing that.
Thank you very much, because the residents in the area around Blandford are very keenly looking forward to this. It's very badly needed and a good investment. So soon as you can, please. My third point to raise is that I don't see much in here, and I'm not sure if this is the place where I would expect to see it, about our strategies for addressing fly tipping, because whereas the waste department is a success story and gets better and better every year, fly tipping across certainly the rural areas is going up all of the time. What are we doing about that? Is there more we can do to prevent fly tipping and to address fly tipping, to punish fly tippers? Because it's a real issue in rural areas, and I know it is something that the waste team deal with effectively, but is there more we can do? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the waste enforcement used to sit within the waste team, and we've done a trial recently where that's moved to community and public protection. So the waste enforcement team have moved across and working more closely with trading standard officers, and that just made sense in terms of resourcing and having more enforcement officers in a local area. What we're finding is quite often different actions that the waste team take excuse me, in terms of, changing policy and other things will impact negatively on fly tipping. Actually, if you speak to the enforcement team, that's not the case. Most people who fly tip are criminals. They're known to the police. They're doing it because it's a lucrative industry. They're moving away from other petty crime and moving towards fly tipping. So you don't tend to find the law-abiding householder if a facility is no longer available to them or we change something slightly. You don't find a law-abiding person going out fly tipping. What you find is it's a criminal activity, and the enforcement team are working hard to target that. And they're working very closely with the police and crime commissioners and rural crime division across the whole of Dorset. So there's some really good networks going on there to try and tackle that, because most people that the enforcement team deal with are already known to the police for other reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Bryan next, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Bryan, St Leonards and St Ives. A couple of points I'd like to raise. Unless there's been a change, the vehicle orders were placed early this year for replacement vehicles with very long lead times. So those orders are actually placed to bring the fleet up to date. The more important thing for me is, let me just say, Gemma, you do an absolutely cracking job under very difficult circumstances, because it's one of the items that's high on the priority of how we get judged. So your team performance just shows this council in a very good light. So I thank you for that, and thank you to the team. I didn't see anywhere in the report any mention of your road sweeping, which obviously, with my old hat on, is fairly important to me, because probably the biggest complaint I receive is the lack of road sweeping. And I know road sweeping comes under waste services. I've long campaigned for that to be dealt with, but there seems to be a reluctance to do anything about it. But more recently, I saw I watched the interview given by Councillor Ireland to one of the radio stations, and he was put on the spot about glyphosate and what we were doing about it. Well, as we know, if we stop the weeds growing at the side of the road, we don't need the glyphosate. So that's why road sweeping is so important going forward. And I don't see anything in the report. Is there something that is going to come as a separate report, or have I missed it?
You haven't missed it. No, it's not in the report. This report is focused purely on waste, and street cleansing comes under waste operations, which is Mike Moon's area. But saying that, we work very closely because obviously all the operatives share the same depots, and we're looking to do quite a lot of what we've done with the waste team with street cleansing as well, in terms of in-cab devices and using technology to help develop that service as well. But this strategy is purely the waste strategy, and a street cleansing strategy may be coming forward. I don't think there's a particular plan to update that at the moment, but that is something that we do need to continue to work in collaboration with. And I think the hedge-to-hedge review as well, working closely with highways as well, that whole package, there's a lot of synergies there to address some of the issues you're talking about, particularly in relation to weeds.
Okay. Councillor Somper next.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that question, Councillor Jesperson, on fly tipping. It was one I was going to ask, and a very efficient team dealt with a particularly nasty piece of fly tipping in my area, and I'm grateful for that. And they were really hot on it, and I was very impressed, as were residents. It's a suggestion on tackling commercial waste from holiday lets. So you're referring to holiday lets. Does that include Airbnbs? I assume it does. And you are working jointly between council departments. May I suggest that down on the ground in the parishes with parish councils, you might want to perhaps work with them or a campaign of some kind, because they know where these premises are, and I think you'd find that very helpful, a helpful source anyway.
Councillor Parry next.
Thank you. Nothing quite lights up a ward councillor's inbox, phone and social media as a missed bin collection. It's the one thing we have all experienced, and you referred to route optimisation. Now, obviously, this often follows development of a large chunk of that, which is currently happening in my West Parley ward. On behalf of all members, I think I can ask this question to you. Are you confident that you will be proactive in your engagement with ward members when route optimisation will be taking place? Because it's likely we are going to experience a period of bedding in, and we understand that can be quite a difficult place, and it is somewhere that the council's reputation is often criticised when these things don't go to plan.
Yes, absolutely. We would definitely engage with ward members ahead of that happening. And just to give you some reassurance, every year we rebalance the garden waste rounds. So as new customers come on, we're obviously getting significant growth every year. And every sort of the start of every year, January time, we do a sort of restructure of rounds in relation to garden waste. And so we have got significant experience of running those smaller scale route optimisations well now. We did have an issue a few years back, which I think members of East Dorset area remember, and that's an old system. The system we're using now and the data that we've collated is much more efficient, so I would have much more confidence in that, and we would absolutely engage with you ahead of any large scale change.
Are you following on from that? Okay, carry on then.
Thank you. Yes, as a small follow-on on the missed bin collection, it must be very frustrating for waste collection when roads are closed and there are diversionary routes. And I know that there clearly is a communication crossover from highways when road closures are requested into waste collection, but it doesn't always feel as if it works terribly well. And I wonder if there could be perhaps a better cross-directorate or department working on that. It isn't always the fault of anyone in particular, and obviously roadworks mean there are holes in the road and all sorts of things which can obviously impact, but better planning of that perhaps would be helpful to our waste services, who I have to say in my area, they are brilliant at coming out and dealing with those missed bins, but it must be an enormous frustration and a huge additional cost.
Can I just say that the traffic notifications of road closures go to the waste department, so they're fully aware of all the road closures that are coming up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bartlett next.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Shane Bartlett, Ward Member for Wimborne Minster and Cabinet Member for Planning, Emergency Planning. My risk of me not to mention it before, I do apologise. I just want to refer back to Councillor Lacey Clark's question, his concerns, and trouble with ancient historical market town, it's obviously difficult to move these waste wagons around sometimes because they were built out in the horse and cart era. As my colleague Councillor Andrews knows, has already managed to mention his town. And Councillor Lacey Clark living in Blatford, similarly, a town that was built out in the horse and cart era, so it's difficult to navigate around. I just want to give an assurance to the public listening in that in terms of planning applications, the planning officers do take into consideration the sweep exercises for waste vehicles on small developments and larger developments. Just to give that assurance to the public, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. David Taylor next. Yes.
Up here, just a couple of questions and resolutions, really. Two observations noted. The fact is, one I want to come into was the carbon tax you're about to impose on yourselves. That was quite interesting. I didn't realise that at all, because that's quite important to realise. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but they're going to come against you as a cost. And that's what I'm wondering, as you're talking to the public, might be making a bit worthwhile doing the job properly and getting the waste where it should be. Secondly, the fact is, I know that there's a northern new scheme coming on about Tetra Paks, which is a huge problem for us in Dorset. It's a new recycling centre up in the north of England just started. I don't know whether you're aware of this on that one there. Thirdly is the fact was the drains, which you've now covered. So we do have a lot of blocked drains in where we are, Poundby Road and this, that, the other. We let highways, sweat cleansing of the highways, I think it was, is part of the problem with that one there. And thirdly is the fact of placements of two we've got in Dorchester recycling centres, one in Poundby Road, as you know, and the other one in St George's Road. St George's Road is about to have a huge housing development built there, so it might be a housing problem. Do we have a future problem, sorry, what am I looking for? Are we moving those sites somewhere else? Is that been put in the mix? Thank you. Sorry.
So in relation to Tetra Pak, we are going to be able to collect Tetra Pak and cartons at the curbside imminently. So that will be able to go into the mix. So that will resolve that issue. And the only other issue I can comment on is in relation to the household recycling centres. This is a high-level strategy, and what we will need to do as a team is we need to do a review of household recycling centres across the board, across the whole of Dorset, because there are particular issues at some sites, certainly in the east of the county, and Dorchester site is a very small site. We're very aware of that. We haven't got any capital allocated to develop those sites. We have got capital allocated to the Blandford project, and that's what we're progressing with, and that's the priority of the team at the moment. But we do need to do a wider household waste recycling centre review, which would we would want to engage members with that whole process, because that could be quite contentious and obviously very emotive for individuals because it affects everybody.
Councillor Bryan was next. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to come back on an issue. This morning, I received the first of my 3 vehicles that I get to collect my rubbish. The glass vehicle was fine, that got through okay. But last night, the water company decided to close the road, so it's totally closed. So the waste vehicles are going to face a 14-mile diversion to get to me. So by the time I get home, I'm expecting to have lots of residents saying to me, why wasn't our bins collected? Well, they weren't collected because we've got a road closure. The road closure was announced at 8:05 last night. So that's an emergency road closure that I'm defending my old team here. The traffic regulation team have no control over. In fact, when I phoned them this morning, they didn't even know the road had been closed. They had to look it up quickly. But it just highlights some of the difficulties that the waste team do go through when we have emergency road closures, which is probably more than 50% of the road closures we face at times. I thought I'd just raise that so the public are aware.
Yes, I think the point about our discussion obviously it relates to the wider policy issues involved, but I suppose eventually enough one-off problems becomes a wider policy issue. And certainly I know in Dorchester and I think in Sherborne as well that there have been big issues with road closures and they seem to finish one road and then immediately start the next road with a different organisation. And yeah, it's caused a lot of problems and issues. Councillor Gibson, I think you want to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Simon Gibson from the Verwood ward. It's building on Councillor Taylor's question about the HRCs, and I was going to raise this point anyway, but it's timely. I represent a ward that's on the edge of the council area. Our waste facility, our HRC, is in Hampshire, and that works very well for us. The Summerley facility is one that I know my residents value, and it's close. If we were to not have the access that we have to that currently, the next option is Wimborne, which is oversubscribed, and we know that's a problem. And it's lovely to see that Blandford's getting the upgrade that it needs, but it's well out of catchment for my residents, Councillor Bryan's residents. And I know that we know that it's an issue that needs solving, and whilst I am in complete agreement with the report, almost in totality, I think it's an excellent report that has exactly the right priorities about how we continue to offer a brilliant waste service. Until we can answer the question about infrastructure and the capacity, I fear that a lot of the other bits within the report are undermined. And maybe it was helpful that we started today's meeting talking about the strategic asset management side of it, because classic example, we need to work out how we can get the capital that we need into this, because it is the number 1 and number 2 issue on the resident survey in terms of satisfaction. It's, in my view, probably the best universal service that we offer as a council. And we can't lose sight of the fact that if we don't have the capacity in our HRCs, we undermine so much of the other work that the team does, which I think would be a real shame. So there's a couple of things I think as this report travels through the system. I mean, firstly, very happy to endorse it, Chairman. I think it's an excellent report. But we need to do some work pretty quickly within the report, not just wait for a separate strategy on HRCs about how we're going to address policy objective 4, because we've identified it in the report, but as of yet, no solution to it. That would be my big ask from the discussions we have on it today is what reassurances to members where we don't currently have the facilities within Dorset Council that we can pass on to our residents to say, don't worry, it's still there. Because to lose that Summerley site in particular would cause us tremendous issues in Verwood. So it's only to say that this is a universal service, so how can it be reflected in the report that these areas not currently identified for an upgrade can still get the service they need?
Yeah, infrastructure is one of our key challenges, and it's a high priority for the team. We continue to work with alongside all of our infrastructure. So I've already mentioned the wider depot review, which isn't just looking at waste, it's incorporating highways and green space services as well. And how we can look at strategic assets. We're working much more closely now with colleagues in other departments around that wider strategic asset management programme, rather than just looking at waste in isolation, which hopefully will deliver better results. But the more services you take into account, sometimes the slower and more complex it becomes, but it is a more strategic approach, which I think is the right approach to take. So absolutely agree with you, infrastructure is key, and we are working really hard to develop that, not only depots, transfer stations and household recycling centres.
Thank you for the reassurance. Perhaps more explicit ask is, can we reflect in the report the strategic importance of non-Dorset-based HRCs? Can it be somewhere in there so that it guides our policy on how we use them? Because we know that Hampshire are under pressure with their budget. We don't yet entirely know what they're going to do there, but I do think it's important for residents whose facility is outside of Dorset that the strategy we've got for waste management reflects that their facility is somewhere in the report, that we would at least intend to keep it until we've got better facilities in Dorset.
I don't think we're at the stage where we can make promises within the report about specific individual sites. I think what we've got in there is around value for money, customer service, high performance, and I think those things enable future development. So as I say, one of the things we're working on now is a HRC strategy around what we're going to do across the board, because we can't look at sites in isolation. We have to look in totality across the whole area, and that work will heavily involve members, because we need to involve members at a very early stage, and that's something that is sort of our next priority. This is just a very high-level document that sets the framework for all of those other work streams to sit under.
The last time I promised, Chairman, I understand that, and perhaps rather than focusing on the specific, in this case, Somerley, it's about, because it's not the only cross-border site that we use. We've got quite a few in BCP. I do think that as a policy decision to use cross-border sites is a strategic matter. I don't believe that is a specific matter at all, and it seems strange that it's omitted from a strategic document. I think it needs, I strongly believe, Chairman, it needs to be reflected somewhere in there. It doesn't mean that we need to promise in the report that we will continue to pay X amount to X site, but I think an acknowledgement of the importance that they hold to the capacity of our waste team needs to be reflected in the report. I believe that. And I think it's a missed opportunity if it's not in there. And one of the things I scribbled down here, when you talked about sort of the approaches that underpin where we invest, things like sort of data-led makes a lot of sense. Value for money makes a lot of sense. But this is a universal service. There will be areas where actually value for money can't be the main driver for that. It's got to be access to a facility that everybody else has got near their home. I don't think it's reasonable for one of the remaining universal services that we've got as a council to be patchy, especially if there is an option outside of the Dorset area that we can provide that service. So I think some assurances to those of us that use those facilities in the report would be very welcome.
Right. Thank you very much for that. I think that you made a very good, eloquent point there. I think what we'd like to say is, in conclusion on this is that members do very much appreciate the work involved here, and that this is a really excellent report and a really excellent way forward. And I think if there is some way you can address the concerns that Councillor Gibson has made, look at some amended wording before it goes to Cabinet, I think he would appreciate that, and I think it would fit in with the broader approach as well. So I don't have anything else to add. So yes. I assume we're all happy for it to be passed on to Cabinet. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Item 10. Contaminated land strategy. Right, okay.
Thank you, Chair. So I am Janet Moore, and I'm the Service manager for the environmental protection team, and the contaminated land regime sits within my service. So I have provided a report, but I thought it might be useful, given the complexities in the law in terms of our duties, the processes, the practices. Thought it might be helpful for me to try and explain the strategy in simple terms using a few slides that sit aside the report. Thank you. So what do we mean by contaminated land? So this is a picture of the old Eldridge Pope site in Dorchester, which many of you will be familiar with. It sits to the southerly side of Dorchester as you head towards the Ring Road. As a working brewery, there would have been things like underground stores, grain stores. Grain stores produce nitrates, generators, boilers, that sort of thing. Obviously, you get oil and volatiles into the land. So all these sort of nasties would have contaminated the land. Okay. So move on 70 years, and we now have the multi-use Brewery Square site. And by using the development control process and planning applications, we have ensured that any of that contamination has now either been removed or encapsulated so that there is no risk to human health from the current land use. Although Dorset is predominantly a rural authority that is not subject to the impacts of the major industrial activity associated with main cities and larger towns in the UK, we do have a wide diversity of sites with potentially contaminated land due to our historic land use, and the numbers are now going into the thousands. So in law, the baseline is land is not considered to be contaminated unless there is a reason to think that it should be. And to be classed as contaminated, there must be an identified source and route to an identified receptor, whether that be a person, the environment, or a building, and I'll come back to that briefly. And significant risk must be caused, or likely. So a person is self-evident. The environment, so we're talking about the local environment, so that could be ecology, waterways, groundwater, that sort of thing. And a building might be a historic building where acid conditions might destroy the structure, that sort of thing. There are two main functional processes by which we manage contaminated land. So if we've assessed and determined that a piece of land is already contaminated, the council must ensure that the risk to the receptor is removed. That pocket of land is then named on a public register. At the moment, we only have one piece of land that's still actively managed for this purpose, and that's the Cogdean Elms site over in the Eastern District. And this is classified as a special site, so the contamination is via the route of the waters and the groundwater and the stream that abuts it. And so the Environment Agency actually have responsibility to ensure that there's no harm and to manage that site actively. The other process is via development control and planning applications. So this is where we look to see if a potential development is proposed on land that we believe might be potentially contaminated. If it is, we may ask for further assessment and, if necessary, put conditions on that planning application to address and remediate any issues. So how have we identified land of concern and how do we manage that information? So the law came into force in 2000, and at that time we were obviously the predecessor councils, and they carried out their own historic inspections of land use, which included some site walkovers and desktop evaluations. So came up with a list of potentially contaminated land. From that information, risk assessments were carried out to rate and prioritise the land packages of concern, and that's in Table 2 of the strategy. Currently, we have 14 levels, 14 sites at level 1, which is the highest risk of concern. However, this is probably an erroneous picture because a lot of assumptions have been made historically, and we are working through that list, and we think that that will be drastically reduced. If not, it might be we remain, it's likely that we'll remain with just the one site over on the Eastern District. Sorry, any areas of potentially contaminated land, sorry, go back one, sorry. So any areas of potentially contaminated land is plotted on our QGIS system, which is Dorset Council's mapping system, and we interrogate this when we receive a planning application. If the application is within the areas plotted as contaminated land, we would make appropriate comments back to the planning team. We also use this information for any environmental information regulatory inquiries, and they're like an FOI, similar to an FOI, and any other inquiries that we receive. Okay, thank you. So in terms of bringing this draft strategy to committee, this is chiefly administration tasks so that we comply with the legal requirement to have a strategy for the local authority. Before DC, each legacy council had their own strategies. So we've gone through all those, we've reviewed all those legacy strategies and applied current best practice, which has hopefully resulted in a strategy that's fit for purpose over the next 5 years. The strategy was subject to a targeted consultation process, and the key findings are depicted in the infographic in Appendix 2. And the key findings are mainly about increasing the knowledge of this area to internal and external partners and members, which hopefully some of this will be doing. The practices and protocols described within the strategy have essentially been in place since Dorset Council has been formed, so nothing fundamentally has changed. But we have identified a few areas for improvement, and that's included in the action plan at the end of the strategy. So I hope this gives a useful overview and would ask that, subject to any comments, the strategy be recommended to Cabinet for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions? No? Well, I mean, yeah, Councillor Northam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. I think the strategy is great. I'd like to look and find out what's pertinent in my area. I think I know what's in my area. Historically, you know, the Lodmore Tip with its liquid waste disposal site, I think is pretty, I would guess, is one of your number ones. But I'd like to confirm that, and I'm looked on the Dorset GIS site, Dorset Explorer. I can't find the button for that. It may not be on that site because it limits what it displays. You have access to it, we don't. So I'd like to just come and find out how I inspect what's in my area. Not inspect, make myself aware. Thank you.
You'll be very welcome. I'm sure we'll be happy to talk to you.
I assume, therefore, everybody is happy with this report and to go forward to Cabinet. So thank you very much. Right. Item 11, our work programme. Basically, as you may recall, we had a meeting to talk about what issues we wanted to look into in the future, and we've been asking members from the whole council, not just from this committee, to make suggestions. We've now got a list that we're working our way through in terms of looking at priorities and also discussing with lead council officers about when it might fit into their schedules and that sort of thing. So we want to bring that forward in the near future. It's not quite ready to do this today, but it will then determine the work programme, ongoing work programme for next year. Councillor Jesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hillforts and Upper Tarrants Wood. I have a general point to make, which I have made before, about our work programme. I am concerned that major reports or pieces of work come to this committee too close to the cabinet meeting at which they're going to be determined. So we need to have the flexibility to say at this meeting, this piece of work isn't yet ready to go to cabinet, to send it back for further work and to bring it back. As our work programme is structured, actually we would not be able to do that because things come to overview in the overview immediately before the cabinet meeting. And I think as a principle, that is just wrong. There should be a gap between, and I think we would be very content to see some of these reports in an earlier stage. We don't have to see the finished, polished document. We need to see the work when it's in progress, almost complete, so that we can genuinely have time to comment on it. There's only been, I think, 2 occasions where the previous overview committee sent a report back for further work, and it involved a great deal of brouhaha for officers. We had to schedule in, they had to work really fast to turn it around. We had to bring in a special overview committee to send it forward because it couldn't be moved from the cabinet agenda. So can we just, as a general rule, build that into our system, that there is sufficient space between when we see it and when cabinet see it for us to have the option, if we needed to say, actually, it needs more work. Because as things stand at the moment, it would be very difficult to do that because it would cause a lot of upset. This isn't in reference to any particular item. It's a general point. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I do take your point. Our objective in looking at this was to determine what members' priorities were. So the first thing we've done is to ask what members are most concerned about. Now, some of that will fit into the cabinet timetable. Others may well not do. We will then determine what we want to do in our best way forward. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you very much. I think the work plan's starting to shape up quite nicely, actually. A lot of my priorities are reflected in there. I decided not to contribute specifically to the work plan because the issues that I'm particularly interested in probably better come after we've looked at the economic growth strategy, which is in the work plan. But taking on Sherry's point entirely, in terms of how we do that, I mean, there's a good opportunity here. So if you look at the work plan that's currently scheduled for the 21st of November, there is one item identified on there at the minute. The meeting following that, the 30th of January, has got a single item on it as it stands. Now, I know that'll be beefed up, but the January meeting currently has the growth and economic regeneration strategy on it. Councillor Biggs reminded us that in a couple of weeks' time, we have an all members briefing on the early stages of that strategy. Brilliant. I feel if we were to do overview in the spirit that Sherry was talking about, by getting in nice and early to shape the principles of it rather than just go through the report line by line, let's move that up to November. Let's say to Nick Webster and the team, it doesn't have to be a completed strategy. Come to us so that we can help you guide that strategy towards a completed one. If our workflow is light enough in January to allow it to come back again, fleshed out again, that would be fabulous overview. Yeah. So for me, could we consider asking the growth team to move that up a month to keep the momentum going from the member seminar in a couple of weeks' time?
Yes, I'm quite happy to do that and negotiate timetables. One thing that I haven't mentioned is that we have 2 prospective joint overview meetings. Lindsay, do you want to give people what details we're getting with that? And it may well be at the moment that the November meeting might not happen because we were doing other things and we'll have the budget to look at as well. So, Lindsay, do you want to say?
Yes, Chairman, I haven't got the details in front of me, but I'm just working from memory. There is a joint overview committee scheduled in for the end of October. I think it's the 29th of October, where you're going to be asked to look at the Dorset Council plan, which feeds into Cabinet in December. There are also plans in place at the moment for a second joint overview committee. That will be to look at the transformation strategy, the customer strategy, and the people and culture strategy. I'm talking to the two overview committee chairs at the moment to seek their agreement to do that as a joint overview committee. And once I've had that discussion with them, we will be sending information out about that.
Yes, so we've got both of those and potentially more coming down, the whole budget situation takes place at that time of the year. So it may not be worthwhile to have that meeting as well. Otherwise, we're asking members to come here for a lot of meetings in a relatively short period of time. But the decision's not been taken either way about that. We should work that forwards. Okay, I don't think I can add anything more. Sorry, it's a Northam, yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I support what Councillor Gibson said on the specific item, and we wrote back as committee members suggesting items, and it'd be nice to see them falling into a plan. At the moment, that's the economic growth is the only one that I see. I would have expected the council plan to come, the Dorset local plan, the Dorset economic plan, the specific growth and regeneration plans that might come out, the local transport plan number 4, ecotourism is something that needs to be addressed, and green energy with the government changes are all areas which it would be nice to have a look ahead. I accept they can't all happen now, but let's get it in a schedule of some sort. Thank you. I've got the list here if you want the list, but it's in an email to you. Thank you.
Now, all of those things are on a long list that we went through the other day, Chairman and Vice Chairman and Lindsay here, and basically they're all being worked on. Some will happen sooner rather than later, but there's no inherent reason why over the next 5 years that we shouldn't be able to do virtually everything that's on the list at some point or other. Part of this will be how it fits into the wider council timetable as well, and part of it has to be taken in mind that some officers might be asked to do a lot. For example, if you go through the long list, a heck of a lot of them are to do with transport in some form or another. Whether it would make sense to have them one big review on transport, or better to have several smaller reviews concentrated on specific issues, is the sort of thing we need to discuss at some point, and along with Councillor, along with Matt Piles as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So looking at the Cabinet forward plan, they have the Dorset Innovation Park management options coming to Cabinet with a decision date of the 15th of October. It's difficult to see us getting an opportunity to review that ahead of that. But if they delayed it, then we would get an opportunity. I don't know what's happening. Can you help? Thank you.
All I can say is we're negotiating with relevant officers in each area to try and work out a programme that actually works in terms of what your priorities were, and works in terms of them having the resources to do it. I can't say any more than that at this point there. Yes, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, you've highlighted actually, Councillor Northam. Sorry, Councillor David Taylor, Chelmsford St Mary. 2 areas that we're actually having rapidly coming our way, which we're hoping to review. One is the local plan, which we're very aware of, and also the nitrates, which is coming down our pathway rapidly towards the planning department. It's already here actually under one application last week. So therefore reviews are a little bit tight, I know, but we need this information. And I can say we can emphasise most strengthfully in a planning department that we're having to need to understand these problems now. Thank you, Chair. It's just an observation.
Not to overcomplicate this, but of course, if there are big issues like the local plan that we have to discuss, and we've talked about this before, the local plan has to come to this committee, and but it's enormous, so we might have to just do it bit by bit. I'm sure that for something like the local plan, this committee would be willing to have an extra long committee with a break, or an extra committee, because it seems to me that we might not be able to fit these things in with the committee timetable if we're not willing, and I'm sure we'll be willing to be flexible for something big like the local plan. It might be an all-day meeting, you know, bring your sarnies and your cup of coffee, because if that's what it takes, then there's nothing so important as the local plan, and I'm sure we would be willing.
I can't emphasise more strongly what Cher's saying. You know, this is massively important within our council. The local plan is the baby, because central government is trying to bring down lots of things against us and for us. So we really need to understand what we're doing with it. And Councillor Jefferson is quite right in stating we need at least a day on this. It's a biggie. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, we hear what you say, and I'm sure various cabinet members will get the message as well. But I think that's about as far as I can go today. So moving then on, there were no urgent items and then no executive business. So I can end this meeting at this point. Thank you very much, everybody.